Jack Turner's heart pounded in his chest as he approached the looming structure of Brookhaven Asylum. It was late afternoon, but the sky above was overcast, and the wind whispered through the tall, gnarled trees surrounding the place. The building itself looked like something out of a nightmare, its towering walls crumbling, windows boarded up or shattered, and the once proud Gothic architecture now reduced to a skeleton of rust and decay. Brookhaven had been abandoned for decades, but its reputation lived on. Once home to the mentally ill, it was now nothing more than a place of horror stories and ghost tales. The locals in the nearby town refused to speak of it, their faces tightening in fear whenever its name was mentioned. Jack had always been intrigued by the stories, but it wasn't until he'd been assigned the article by his editor that he realized how deep the mystery of Brookhaven ran. "Just get the story," his editor had said. "We need something with a hook, something that'll make people believe." And so Jack had come, drawn by the possibility of finding something no one had before. A story buried deep within the asylum's walls. The rusted gates creaked open with a push, the sound eerie against the silence of the surrounding woods. He could feel the weight of the place pressing down on him as he stepped forward, the chill in the air seeming to increase with every step. Inside, the building was a labyrinth of dark hallways and echoing silence. The air smelled musty, thick with the scent of old paper and rotting wood. Jack's footsteps echoed as he wandered through the halls, the sound unnervingly loud in the stillness. As he turned a corner, he saw a row of old, rusted doors, each one locked or broken. Behind one of them, a faint whisper caught his attention. He paused, his breath catching in his throat. Was that a voice, or was it his imagination? The walls of Brookhaven were thick with secrets, and something told him that if he stayed long enough, the asylum would reveal its true nature. Jack shook off the unease that began to settle in his stomach and continued down the darkened hallway, his flashlight beam flickering against the cracked walls. The whispers grew louder as he walked, a soft murmur that seemed to come from all directions. Was it the wind, or something else? Suddenly, his flashlight landed on something, scrawled on the wall in jagged, desperate handwriting. "It never ends." The ink looked fresh, almost as if it had been written just yesterday. Jack stepped back, heart racing. Who would still be here writing on the walls? He pulled out his notebook, jotting down the phrase. It was a small clue, but it felt like the first piece of the puzzle. He continued deeper into the asylum, his steps slow but determined. As he passed another door, it suddenly creaked open on its own, as if inviting him in. Jack hesitated for a moment, but the pull of curiosity was stronger than the warning bells in his head. He stepped inside. The room was small, with faded yellow wallpaper peeling from the walls. Old, cracked furniture was scattered haphazardly, covered in a fine layer of dust. At the far end of the room was a small writing desk, and on it, a collection of old journals. Jack moved toward the desk, his fingers brushing over the worn leather covers. He could feel the weight of the past pressing in on him as he flipped through the pages, the ink blurring with age. The writing inside was erratic, disjointed, almost like the ramblings of a madman. He paused on a particular entry, dated just before the asylum's closure. "They don't leave. They're still here watching. I can feel them, feel their cold fingers on my neck, their whispers in my ears. The walls are alive, and they hunger. I've seen their faces, those who died in these halls, but worse. I've seen the thing that calls them back. It's not just the dead, there's something else, something ancient. We're just meat to it." Jack's breath caught in his throat. He had heard rumors about the asylum's dark history, but this was something else entirely. He flipped through more pages, each one darker and more cryptic than the last, until he came upon one final entry. "If you are reading this, get out. Leave now, or you will never leave. They'll keep you, just like they kept me. I thought I was free, but I'm not. I'm still here." Suddenly a loud bang echoed from behind him, followed by the unmistakable sound of something dragging across the floor. Jack spun around, but the room was empty. The silence that followed felt suffocating, pressing against his chest. He backed out of the room quickly, his heart racing, but the whispers started again, louder this time. They weren't coming from the walls. They were coming from the hallway, and they sounded human. Jack's mind reeled. The asylum had been abandoned for years. So why did it feel as though someone or something was still here? As Jack continued his investigation, he began to uncover more and more unsettling details about Brookhaven's past. He visited the local library and pulled up records on the asylum's early days. It was founded in the late 1800s by Dr. Tobias Lambert, a brilliant but controversial psychiatrist who believed that mental illness could be cured through radical methods. However, as the years went on, his practices grew more brutal. Lobotomies were performed as a routine treatment. Patients were subjected to electroshock therapy without any form of consent. Dr. Lambert's journal entries, some of which had been archived, revealed a terrifying obsession with an entity he referred to only as the Whisperer. According to Lambert, this entity had the power to manipulate the minds of patients, driving them to madness, and it was bound to the asylum, feeding on the suffering within its walls. But something had gone wrong. The entity grew stronger over the years, as the abuse and torment continued. Lambert's later entries described how the asylum itself had become alive, its walls pulsating with an unnatural energy. The doctor had tried to control it, but eventually, his obsession with it drove him to madness as well. He locked himself in his office, scribbling furiously in his journals, until his body was discovered lifeless, a mere shell of the man he once was. Jack now understood. The asylum wasn't just haunted by the spirits of the patients. The malevolent force that had driven them to insanity was still here, feeding off the remnants of their pain. As the night wore on, Jack's sense of time began to warp. His phone died. The flashlight flickered in and out. He could feel the walls of the asylum closing in around him, the air growing colder with every passing minute. The whispers were no longer faint murmurs. They were louder, clearer. He could make out words now. Come closer. Stay. Join us. Panic set in as Jack realized that he wasn't alone. The shadows seemed to move with him, darting around the corners of his vision. He began to hear footsteps behind him, slow and deliberate, as though someone or something was following him. He tried to make his way back to the entrance, but the asylum's layout had changed. The hallways seemed to stretch on endlessly, and every door he tried to open led to more darkness. He was trapped. The walls seemed to breathe, exhaling a damp, rancid air that filled his lungs and made him gag. Then he saw them. Figures in the shadows. Their forms distorted and broken, just like the patients in the asylum's past. Their eyes were hollow, their faces twisted in eternal agony. They didn't speak, but their presence filled the air with a suffocating weight. Jack stumbled, backward, knocking over a chair. The figures didn't move, but their whispers grew louder, more urgent. "You're one of us now." His mind snapped. He had to escape. But as he reached for the door, it slammed shut on its own. He screamed, banging on the door with all his strength, but the whispers turned into laughter, cold, hollow laughter that echoed through the asylum. Jack realized the horrible truth. He wasn't the first to come here seeking answers. Countless others had come before him, lured by the promise of uncovering the asylum's secrets, only to fall victim to the entity that had claimed Brookhaven for itself. As Jack's sanity continued to unravel, he stumbled into a hidden chamber beneath the asylum, a place that Dr. Lambert had described in his final journal entries. It was there that the entity, the Whisperer, resided. It was ancient, a being that had existed long before the asylum was built, feeding off the anguish of those trapped within its walls. The air in the chamber was thick with an oppressive darkness. Jack could feel it pressing against his skin, suffocating him. He could see the shape now, a writhing, shadowy form, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The entity spoke, its voice like 1,000 whispers, all speaking at once. "You are mine." Jack's mind fractured. He saw flashes of the asylum's past, patients screaming as they were subjected to horrific treatments, their suffering feeding the entity's power. He saw Dr. Lambert, a broken man, desperately trying to break free from the influence of the Whisperer, but failing. And then, Jack understood. The entity fed on the souls of the lost, and once it had claimed them, it kept them forever. In that moment, Jack knew he was trapped, just as the others had been. The asylum had consumed him, just as it had consumed so many before him. Months later, the local authorities found Jack's abandoned car outside the asylum. His body was never found, but the journal he had been keeping was discovered, its final pages filled with frantic scribblings. The last entry was simple. It never ends. Brookhaven Asylum stood silent, its walls now completely still. But if one listened closely enough, they could hear the whispers, faint, distant, but still there. They were waiting for the next soul to wander too close.